Hello, my name is Haley Fincher, and today I will be speaking with you about research based on communication privacy management theory. Communication privacy management theory, or CPM for short, was developed in 1991 by Dr. Sandra Petronio. It was as a response to social penetration theory. It was originally designed to explain marital relationships and was referred to as communication boundary management. However, in the early 2000s, aspects of private disclosure of information was added and became known as communication privacy management theory. Communication privacy management states that people are the owners of their own personal and private information. When someone chooses to disclose information to another person, the second person then becomes a co-owner of the information. Each owner and co-owner has boundaries and rules for the disclosure of this information. When the boundaries are crossed or rules broken, that's when turbulence can occur. Petronio coined the term confidants to refer to the types of co-owners. Inferential confidants are people who deserve to know the information, such as co-parents sharing information about their child. Reluctant confidants are those who do not need to know, but also don't necessarily want to know the information, such as someone overhearing a conversation in public. And the final confidant is a deliberate confidant. These are people who are intentionally trying to obtain the information, such as a doctor asking questions related to your health, or even someone just seeking information for gossip purposes. The three studies I will be discussing today are by Schrodt, Colander et al., and Hayes and Butaski. I chose these specifically to highlight because they show a variety of topics that can be researched with the use of communication privacy management. However, they also all do so with the use of surveys, questionnaires, and interviews, which is what I will be focusing on. In 2013, Schrodt conducted a study about how college students viewed their instructors' credibility based on their level of disclosure in the classroom. He had 6 hypotheses dealing with perceptions of frequency with disclosure of personal information, appropriateness of instructor disclosure of information, content relevance and interaction with students' perceptions of instructor disclosure, students' comfort with instructors' disclosure, and the students' comfort with disclosure of information and how it will interact with perceptions of instructor credibility. To complete this study, Schrodt surveyed 382 undergraduate students at a medium-sized private university in the southwestern United States. All of the students were enrolled in a basic communications courses, and their ages were ranged from 18 years old to 30-year-olds. They were also either classified as first-year students or as sophomores. Over half the participants were female, and a majority of them stated they were of Caucasian ethnicity. The survey was conducted as an online questionnaire. It was done on a voluntary basis, but students could receive extra credit of less than 2% for participating. Students were instructed to answer the questions by referencing the instructor for the class they had just met prior to the communication course. This was done so that instructors from a wide variety of academic disciplines would be considered and referenced in the responses. The questionnaire took approximately 20 minutes to complete. What this study aimed to measure was the frequency of instructor disclosure, appropriateness of instructor disclosures, content relevance, comfort with instructor disclosures, and instructor credibility. Students' perceptions of the frequency with which their instructors disclosed information were measured using the Canis and Martin's Instructor Self-Disclosure Scale, which originally had 18 items assessing the amount of instructor disclosures using a 7-point Likert scale, ranging from 1 being strongly agree to 7 being strongly disagree. Examples of these would be my instructor expresses his or her beliefs, or my instructor reveals personal information about his or her personal life. For this particular study, responses were solicited using a 5-point frequency scale that ranged from never to very often. Perceived appropriateness of instructors' disclosure was measured using a modified version of the conversational appropriateness scale, which originally consisted of 20 items asking to indicate the level of appropriateness. For this particular study, an 18-item scale was adapted so that students assessed the appropriateness of the instructor's disclosures. Items such as everything he or she said was appropriate, his or her conversation was suitable to the situation, were altered to read so that my instructor disclosed appropriate information or my instructor's disclosures were suitable. Responses were solicited using a 7-point Likert scale that ranked from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and were then averaged so that higher scores represented more appropriate disclosures. Students' perceptions of content relevance were measured using Freimeyer and Schulman's content relevance scale. This scale asks students to rate the degree to which their instructor uses examples, exercises, assignments, and both personal and student experiences to make the content relevant and meaningful. Examples would include my instructor uses examples to make the content relevant to me, or my instructor explicitly states how the material relates to my career goals or to my life in general. Responses were solicited using a 5-point frequency scale that ranged from never to very often, and then were averaged so that higher scores represented greater degrees of content relevance. For comfort with instructors' disclosures, a pool of 18 semantic differential items were generated. Students were instructed to indicate a response toward either word which best describes how comfortable they were with the personal information their instructor disclosed during the semester. Responses were solicited using a 7-point scale. Items such as comfortable or uncomfortable, assured or anxious, worried or at ease, or restless or content. Students' perceptions of instructor credibility were measured using McCroskey and Teven's ethos credibility scale. His instrument is an 18-item semantic differential scale asking students to evaluate their instructor in terms of specific bipolar adjectives listed on a 7-point scale. 6 items measured instructor competence, such as trained or untrained. 6 measured trustworthiness, such as honest or dishonest. And the remaining 6 measured goodwill, such as cares about me or doesn't care about me. The first 4 of Schroth's hypotheses were tested using Pearson's product moment correlations. To test hypotheses 5 and 6, hierarchical regression analysis were conducted. The 2 regressions included students' perceptions of instructors' disclosure frequency, appropriateness, and content relevance, and student perception of instructors' disclosure frequency, appropriateness, and student comfort with instructor disclosures, both at step 1. All 2-way interaction effects are on step 2, and all 3-way interaction effects were on step 3. Dimensions of instructor credibility included competence, trustworthiness, and goodwill. Table 1, shown here in the right-hand corner, shows the descriptive statistics, including means, standard deviations, and Pearson product moment correlation for all variables. Hypotheses 1 and 2 predicted that students' perceptions of instructor disclosures frequency and appropriateness would positively predict student perceptions of instructor credibility, such as competence, trustworthiness, and goodwill. However, the data showed no significant correlations emerged between perceived frequency of instructor disclosures and the 3 dimensions of instructor credibility. Hypothesis 1 was not supported. The results did reveal, however, that the perceived appropriateness of instructor disclosure was positively associated with perceptions of instructor competence, trustworthiness, and goodwill. Hypothesis 2 was supported by the results. Hypothesis 3 and 4 predicted that content relevance would positively predict perceptions of instructor credibility and moderate the associations between instructor disclosures and credibility. Both of these hypotheses were supported, as content relevance positively predicted perceptions of instructor competence, trustworthiness, and goodwill, and it moderated the associations between perceptions of instructor disclosure and instructor credibility. Hypothesis 5 and 6 predicted that students' comfort with the instructor disclosures would positively predict perceptions of the instructor credibility and moderate the positive effects of disclosure frequency and appropriateness on perceptions of credibility. Again, both of these hypotheses were supported. The second study I will be discussing is by Colander et al. In 2022. This study looked at communication privacy management between birth families and adoptive parents of children in an open adoption. The hypotheses included adoptive parents' exterior family privacy orientation and interior family privacy orientation are associated with perceived risk of disclosures to the birth family, such that less permeable privacy orientations related to increased perceived risk of adoption disclosures at birth family. Adoptive parents' anticipation of boundary turbulence is associated with increased perceived risk of disclosures to the birth family. Adoptive parents' anticipation of boundary turbulence and perceived risk of disclosure to birth families are related to increased boundary coordination with birth families. Perceived risk of disclosures to birth families mediates the relationship between family orientation, both interior and exterior, and boundary coordination. And perceived risk of disclosures to birth families mediates the relationship between anticipation of boundary turbulence and boundary coordination. The research questioned were how are adoptive parents' exterior family privacy orientation and interior family privacy orientation related to their boundary coordination with birth families? Figure 1, shown in the corner here, shows the model of how they felt each component would work together for each hypothesis. In order to participate in this study, individuals had to be at least 18 years of age and be an adoptive parent of a child under the age of 18 and in an open adoption relationship with at least one member of the child's birth or biological family. To recruit for this study, researchers posted a description of the study and a link to the survey in adoptive parent online forums. Researchers also contacted adoption agencies in a large Midwestern state and requested that agencies share the study with their clients. There were 15 agencies that shared the study. Those who were recruited through the agencies were compensated with a $15 gift card once the survey was completed. Participants were asked to report on the child's birth parent with whom they felt the closest to. A majority reported that they felt closest to the birth mother, then the birth father, followed by other birth relatives. What this study intended to measure was family privacy orientation, anticipated boundary turbulence, perceived risk of disclosure to the birth family, boundary coordination, and communication channels. For family privacy orientation, adoptive parents reported on how open the family tended to be with private information. The assessment scale included 11 items, with 6 items assessing interior family privacy, such as family members keep secrets from one another, and five items assessing exterior family privacy, such as the family shares information freely with those outside the family. Items were coded such that high scores indicated less permeable privacy boundaries, held by individuals who would be considered more private. Adoptive parents' anticipation of boundary turbulence were assessed using Hess and Rusher's 11-item scale for this construct. Items including questions such as, I worry that if I disclose private information to my child's birth parent, then my trust will be betrayed. Items were coded so that high scores indicated high levels of anticipated boundary turbulence. Adoptive parents' perception of risk of disclosure to the birth family was assessed on a 5-item semantic differential scale. Items included low risk to high risk and non-intense to intense, with high scores again representing high levels of perceived risk of disclosure to the birth family. Adoptive parents' privacy boundary coordination with the birth parent was assessed with a 5-item scale. Items were adapted from the Kennedy-Lightsey et al. Scale on boundary coordination in friendships to assess the adoptive birth parent privacy ownership, such as, my child's birth parent and I have discussed how I would feel if he or she told information about my child to someone I know. High scores indicate high levels of coordination. Adoptive parents indicate how often they communicated with the birth parent via texting, social media, which was defined in this survey as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blogs, online games, etc., and face-to-face visits. Adoptive parents reporting the frequency of communication by selecting either never, once a year, 2 to 3 times a year, once a month, 2 to 3 times a month, once a week, 2 to 3 times a week, or daily for each mode of communication. To test the hypothesized model, structural equation model, or SEM, was utilized using maximum likelihood estimation for R in the leave-in package. SEM was employed due to its capacity to correct for measurement error and its ability to estimate complex variable relationships simultaneously. The hypothesized model consisted of 5 latent variables: interior family privacy orientation, exterior family privacy orientation, anticipation of boundary turbulence, perceived risk of disclosures to the birth family, and boundary coordination. Latent variables were identified by combining items from each measurement scale into 3 parcels, created by averaging 2 or more items from the scale to create 3 groups of items that together model the latent variable. Individual items were used to identify latent variables when an odd number of items were present. Bootstrapping analysis was conducted using Levin to assess all indirect effects. Group moderation was also used to assess the effects by contact mode. To test the model depicted in Figure 1, again shown here, the dependent variable of boundary coordination was regressed on the mediator, perceived risk of disclosure to the birth family, and the three independent variables of exterior family privacy, interior family privacy, and anticipation of boundary turbulence. The mediator was also regressed on the independent variable. Exterior family privacy was not related to perceived risk of disclosure to the birth family. A significant positive relationship was found for interior family privacy orientation and perceived risk of disclosure to the birth family, meaning that families with less permeable boundaries view disclosure to be riskier. Because of this, hypothesis 1 was partially supported. Results depicted a positive relationship between anticipation of boundary turbulence and perceived risk of disclosure to the birth family. This shows that hypothesis 2 was supported. In support of hypothesis 3, results depicted a positive relationship between anticipation of boundary turbulence with boundary coordination, as well as perceived risk of disclosure to the birth family with boundary coordination. Regarding the research question, exterior family privacy orientation was not related to boundary coordination. However, a less permeable interior family privacy orientation was related to a higher anticipation of boundary turbulence. The third and final study I will be discussing today is by Hayes and Butaski. This study discussed privacy management of parents and children with autism about their child's ASD diagnosis. Their hypotheses included higher levels of perceived risk of information will be positively related to coordination of information regarding the child's ASD. Higher levels of anticipated boundary turbulence will be positively related to coordination of information regarding the child's ASD. Higher levels of anticipated boundary turbulence will be negatively related to openness surrounding the child's ASD. The research question asked, who do parents share private information with regarding their child's ASD diagnosis, both within and outside of the family? Participants in this study consisted of 80 parents of a child with an autism diagnosis. They were recruited through convenient online forums such as Facebook and autism blogs, through local and statewide disability organizations and care centers, and with the snowball sampling. Parents ranged in age from 20 years to 58 years and were predominantly female and of Caucasian ethnicity. The children were on average of 11 years old and had an average score of a 2.74 in terms of severity, where 1 meant normal functioning and 5 was severe in regard to their functioning with verbal, social, and nonverbal. The children were predominantly male, which is common with an ASD diagnosis. This study was conducted as an online survey where parents were asked 2 open-ended questions. The questions included, list the people in your extended family who you talk to about your child's ASD. These people can include your parents, grandparents, siblings, in-laws, or aunts and uncles, for example. The second open-ended question was, who else do you talk to about your child's ASD? These are people in your personal network and can include medical professionals, neighbors, coworkers, or friends, for example. Parents were then asked a number of measures assessing their willingness to discuss their child's diagnosis. They were asked to keep the list of people in mind from the open-ended questions when answering the next questions. This study measured boundary turbulence, communication openness, and perceived risk and boundary coordination. A scale measuring how much participants worry about boundary turbulence was adapted from a measure by Hesse and Roscher, who constructed items using Petronio's conceptualization of boundary turbulence. The scale used in this study consisted of 7 summed items where higher scores indicated more anticipation of boundary turbulence. An example of such item would be, I worry that if I disclose private information about my child's ASD to my family or my personal network, my trust will be betrayed. An adapted measure of Brodinski's communication openness in adoption was adapted to assess parents' perception of their level of communication openness with their listed family or personal network. This study found value in utilizing this scale over traditional openness scales because it can assess the extent to which parents feel comfortable and open when discussing autism details, which is often perceived to be a sensitive information. Example items of from this study would include I can discuss my true thoughts and feelings about ASD and the process with my family or personal network without feeling uncomfortable or embarrassed, or it's easy for me to express my thoughts and feelings about ASD for my family or personal network. Kennedy Lightseus et al. Constructed measures to assess risk and coordination and ownership of private information between friends. Items were adapted for this study to uncover parents' level of coordination and risk sharing with their family and personal network. Participants rated risk after being prompted with the statement, the information you share with your family or personal network about your child's ASD is risk assessment using the sum of 4 adapted 6-point scales, where 1 equals less and 6 equals more. Polar opposite semantic differential items, not very severe or severe, not very intense or intense, not very dangerous or to dangerous, or not very jeopardizing to jeopardizing. Hypothesis 1, predicting that sharing risk-laden ASD information will lead to parents of a child with autism to be more coordinated with their family and personal network. Results from a linear regression revealed that boundary coordination was significantly positively predicted by perceived risk. The data showed that hypothesis 1 was supported. Hypothesis 2 predicted that anticipation of boundary turbulence over ASD details would lead to parents to be more coordinated. To test this, a linear regression analysis was run. Results revealed that boundary coordination was significantly positively predicted by the anticipation of turbulence. Data showed that hypothesis 2 was also supported. Hypothesis 3 predicted that the anticipation of boundary turbulence would be negatively related to parents' communicative openness regarding their child's ASD diagnosis. Results from a linear regression revealed that communication was significantly negatively predicted by anticipated boundary turbulence. Hypothesis 3 was supported. Research question 1 aimed to identify with whom parents of a child with autism disclose private information and diagnosis details to, both within and outside of the family. Parents in this study were information guardians when it came to their children with autism. They're the ones who chose what information and with whom it is disclosed. I hope this presentation has helped you not only to understand a little more about communication privacy management theory and how it can be applied to multiple different areas, but also how both surveys and interviews and questionnaires can be applied across these areas to assist in gathering both quantitative and qualitative data to try to answer a wide variety of questions. Thank you for your time.